Hello, everybody, and welcome to this installment of lectures. In this series of lectures, we're going to be talking about synaptic transmission. So how does one neuron communicate with another neuron through the synapse? And in this particular video, we will be talking about the process of presynaptic vesicle release. So we are going to be addressing these questions: how do neurons communicate with each other, and what are the steps of chemical synaptic transmission? So let's get started. First of all, I want to lay the groundwork, set the stage a little bit here. So far, you've learned about how a neuron can carry an electrical signal from one end of the neuron to the other end of the neuron, basically, right, from the cell body kind of to the axon terminal, the end of the axon. And that's very useful because, you know, in that way, we can carry signals very long distances. There are some neurons that are very, very long that go from your head all the way down to your toes. So it is very useful to be able to conduct those action potentials and to do so quickly. But I do want to remind you that neurons form networks, right? So they kind of connect with each other in all these interesting ways. And they're going to need to be able to pass that signal that you get from one neuron onto the neurons that are downstream of them. They're going to need to be able to pass that signal on to other neurons. And we have not yet talked about how that happens, okay? And a lot of interesting things happen when you do that. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so in the nervous system, we see two main types of synapses. One is the electrical synapse. So neurons can actually communicate with each other through gap junctions. Okay, hopefully you guys know about gap junctions from elsewhere in your education. But suffice it to say, gap junctions are basically these kind of channels that connect two cells to each other. So if you have one neuron connected to another neuron through a gap junction, what can happen is the ions from the one neuron can just go through the gap junctions into the other neuron. And in that way, they can carry like a graded potential, maybe an action potential. It's as though these two cells were continuous. It's almost as though they were acting like one cell, okay? And this is very fast because you just have to go through that channel, that gap junction there, okay? So that's pretty much all I'm gonna say about electrical synapses, possibly for this whole course. Most synapses in the body, in the nervous system, are chemical synapses. So what happens in a chemical synapse is when the presynaptic neuron, hopefully you remember that term, when the presynaptic neuron has an action potential and that action potential reaches the end of that neuron, that signal, which is electrical in nature, gets converted to a chemical signal that then gets passed on to the next neuron, to the postsynaptic neuron, okay? So we're gonna be taking a look at the details of how that happens in this video. Before we do that, I just kind of quickly want to review the anatomy of a chemical synapse. So just remind you of some of the terminology we're using here, okay? We have our cell that is kind of passing off the signal. That's called the presynaptic neuron, okay? This area of the axon, the kind of the end of the axon, we refer to as the axon terminal. And then the cell that is going to be receiving the signal is called the postsynaptic cell, okay? I also want to point out a few additional things to you. We have these synaptic vesicles hanging around in the axon terminal here. Those contain the neurotransmitter, the signaling molecule that's going to be passed on to the receiving cell, the postsynaptic cell. What else should I point out? Maybe, oh, right, so this space between the two neurons is called the synaptic cleft, Okay, and this whole structure here is called the synapse. To the right, we see an actual picture, a transmission electron micrograph of synapse. So what you can see here, this is the axon terminal, kind of in yellow. All of these little blue structures are the synaptic vesicles containing neurotransmitter, that signaling molecule. Here at the end, or sorry, down here in blue, kind of this ocean blue color, that is the postsynaptic cell. And then you can see in this like light sky blue color is the synaptic cleft. Also of note is the fact that you can see this Schwann cell here wrapped around this axon. Okay,